Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I think this is a particularly special session because I get to host Swati, who I get an opportunity also to work on a daily basis on the Atal Innovation Mission, specifically the Mentor India program and the Atal Tinkering Labs program. So I think just to get things started, Swati, it'll be lovely to hear about how you got into the world of education and entrepreneurship for school students. And how has the journey been so far?
Thanks, Varya. Hello, everyone. This is Swati, and I'm an innovation lead with the Atal Tinkering Labs team at Atal Innovation Mission in NITI Aayog. So I am an engineer by profession. I then did my master's in business administration from the Indian School of Business. Since then, I've worked as a product manager at a startup in Gurgaon itself. And we were working towards creating products for the B2B E-commerce space. So very different from what I'm doing right now. But this opportunity came up through an alumni of ISB who was a part of NITI Aayog's Atal Innovation Mission's founding team. And he, introduced this sort of program to us. So since then, I visited a couple of schools. I spoke to a few teachers in Atal Tinkering Labs, and I realized that I could add a lot of value to this program through my background, through what I've done. I've essentially built products, and this for me was a product in a way. So I joined the team, and it's been 2 years now as a consultant with the government. So it's a very different experience because I've always been in the corporate sort of side, and in the government, in AIM, it's as an outsider, you'd think that it's very sarkari, but it's really not. We run like a startup, but we are laced with all the challenges that come being housed in a government body. So it's a very interesting mix, and that is what drives a lot of us. We're a very young team, and all from different sort of backgrounds. None of us are actually from the government background, and we're here to sort of give back. So no messages. To the schools and the society.
Yeah.
So as a part of, go ahead, Varya.
No, sorry, I was saying, Swati, I think I really liked the product approach that you mentioned. And, for the ones who are not as familiar with what Atal Innovation Mission or Atal Tinkering Labs do, I think before we get into the other things, it'll be very helpful for you to explain that to everyone.
Yeah. So Atal Innovation Mission was started as an initiative from the Prime Minister's office to bring in a culture of innovation and creativity within India. And it has different programs. So I am a part of the Atal Tinkering Labs program within AIM, Atal Innovation Mission. And Atal Tinkering Labs, which I may refer to as ATLs during the conversation. So ATLs was set up in schools. Mostly government schools, mostly in rural areas. And it's essentially a space where kids can come, they can tinker around with latest technologies such as 3D printers, IoT, robotics, and so on, and create products, create solutions, simple solutions for their community. So it is a space which is free of a curriculum, which is free of any exams, any tests, of any sort of structure, so to say. Though we are trying to build a program around it, but we're trying to keep it open for students to come and learn and just innovate freely.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about Atal Tinkering Labs is are the teachers themselves, right? So there's a vibrant community of mentors of change who are essentially working professionals like you and I, who volunteer their time every week to mentor students in these Atal Tinkering Labs from all across. So just building on this, right, I think the interesting or the novel aspect of Atal Innovation Mission is, on one end, you have a creative tinkering space for students where they can explore anything, and they're introduced to some of the latest technologies and developments that are happening in the world around. And then the second is they learn from people who aren't teachers professionally. So that also adds another layer to it. So could you tell us a little bit about, how this ecosystem sort of gets together? Because one part is just say matching mentors and students to find that balance. And then the other is also, how does the mentor really decide what to mentor them on? It can also seem a little vague and amorphous at times. So how does it all come together?
Sure. So interesting question that you brought up, mentorship. So when we started Atal Tinkering Labs, we essentially we tried to build in capacity within the teachers itself, those who are present in the school. But we realized that these teachers who are already teaching multiple subjects within the school are now taking up additional responsibility of managing this Atal Tinkering Lab. They suddenly now had to upskill, they had to learn what a 3D printer does, what is robotics. And this is quite complex to a teacher in a government school who's probably been teaching chemistry or biology in a set curriculum which has been the same for a while now. So we try to do a lot of trainings for teachers and so on. But one big challenge in capacity building of teachers is that, especially in government schools, they keep getting transferred. And that is something that we're still trying to combat, because the more you train, the more they get changed. And then there is a whole new lot of teachers that you again have to build capacity from scratch. So we realized that if we bring in thought leaders, if we bring in professionals from the industry, from people working in the corporate world, people who are professors in the academic institutes, they can come in and volunteer their time to these school children. And that also adds another layer, is that these people bring in an expertise with them. They know what is being used in the real world, which might be a little different from what the kids actually learn in schools, which is a lot different. So that sort of element is what mentors got into our program. And now Varya knows we are a community of over 5,300 mentors across India who week on week volunteer the time on a completely pro bono basis to teach children the latest skills that they are working on, the latest research that they are working on. And so that is something that we've tried to build in over the years. But what we do see over the last few months, and Varya, you know this, is that schools have now sort of reached a certain stage. The program has matured to a certain stage that they are aware of these skills now, of what is needed in the real world. So now a lot of schools come back and tell us that, we need a session on artificial intelligence. We need a session on robotics. And of course, a mentor that was mapped to them earlier would not have an expertise of all the skills. He or she must be good in his own domain. And there's a need and a shift towards skill-based mentoring. And this is what we're seeing, more often these days. School come back and tell us that, we need a mentor in this field. And mentors come back and tell us that we want to mentor kids in our specific area of expertise. So that is something that we are trying to incorporate into our Atal Tinkering Labs Mentor India program, where we build an aggregator sort of model for mentoring, where you can access mentors based on the skills you need each.
Yeah, a lot like Uber for mentorship, right? Like based on what school, where they need, they're getting mapped. And I think what's very interesting is also just how centralized and decentralized it is at the same time, which is to say that, there are mentors doing sessions that are held nationally, as well as mentors who are mapped specifically to schools and students, and then also getting the personalized learning. And which also brings me to the next question, which is sort of to say that, a lot of what Atal Innovation Mission, especially with Atal Tinkering Labs, tries to do is something we've discussed extensively in the fellowship, which is, actual tangible learning. In Atal Tinkering Labs, there's actual product or a prototype students are creating. It's, making the why of learning very clear, because typically they do a lot of these tinkering activities around a problem statement that is there, and even otherwise, right? So I think what I find very interesting about Atal Tinkering Labs is that it's very aspirational in the sense of what it tries to achieve, but what are really the challenges, right? Like, because when you do something as ambitious and aspirational as Atal Tinkering Labs and running a mentoring community, it's the things, getting it started, especially the first few years have been the hardest. And like you mentioned, you've been there for 2 years. So say between year 1 and year 2, how have things changed, and what are things that have gotten better, and what are things that continue to be a bottleneck or a short-term challenge for now?
Since then, we've realized to even do that, to really sort of take it to a stage where state governments want to come in and want to take this model across, it needs to reach a certain mark. A certain number of schools have to have the Atal Tinkering Lab to get to that stage. And to do that, the focus has always been on 4 pillars. One is selection of these schools. How do we select these schools? Obviously the preference is given to government schools, but a lot of areas across India where more focus needs to be given. The Northeast, say, for example, the rural areas of central India, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, Andaman and Nicobar. These are some of the areas which have been the key focus and have come into the picture over the last 1 year now. And so select is one part where we select and give the grants. And then the schools are given this model where we tell them, how do you establish? So there's a standardization across the country. The most important 2 aspects are enabling the schools then and celebrating them. So we've done this through very crucial partnerships that we've formed throughout the 4 years, especially more recently, where we've tied hands with a lot of corporate partners, with a lot of incubation centers. Because after a certain point of time, kids are, innovating, they're creating these prototypes. But what next? That is something that we've been looking at since from year 3 to year 4 now. Connecting them with corporates who can actually take their prototype to a patent or to take it to a market. We have so many startups that have come out of children who are just 12, 13-year-old. So that is one aspect of connecting them with crucial partners and finally taking it to the final stage of what they're building. The second most important part is the recognition platform itself. Now, celebrating and recognizing these innovators is very important to continue that journey, to inspire the next lot of the students who are in their school, who are going to start innovating in the Atal Tinkering Labs. And we've been trying to create this sort of platform through various mechanisms. We have exchange programs now with international countries. We have with Russia, where students go to Russia and innovate with the Russian kids, and so on. So there's a lot of thought that's gone into building these recognition platforms. But recognition platforms differ greatly when it comes to mentors. Mentors are a very important stakeholder, but they're doing this on a completely voluntary basis. So it becomes even more important for us to really keep them engaged throughout and to definitely make sure that their stories are published on a national level. They get to meet different kinds of dignitaries, top mentors from the global community as well. So recognition platforms and crucial partnerships at the right time, I think, are the 2 most important pillars of this of the journey that has basically changed since year 3 and 4, now that we're maturing towards a more stable program.
Yeah, I think incentives have probably become the most important thing in making sure operations run well. Just building on this, right? In a previous masterclass in which when we had hosted Mr. Ramanan, who was the former mission director for Atal Innovation Mission, he looked at Atal Innovation Mission essentially as a platform or an ecosystem which just brought different stakeholders together and let them, find synergies and ways in which they can collaborate to further the cause of innovation and entrepreneurship. And while the larger ecosystem is a lot more complex, there are multiple levels, with the incubation centers and the challenges and so on that exist. Can you tell us specifically about how the landscape looks at when we look at Atal Tinkering Labs? And the purpose behind this question is that, in the previous sessions, one thing that's come out is that education is a challenge that no one organization and individual or company can solve. And in India, government is probably the closest it comes to in which one institution or machinery can address it, right? So for Atal Innovation Mission, what are the important stakeholders that are there? The schools and mentors are the 2 ones that we have already discussed. But are there other people or companies or organizations that AIM considers important? And how and what is the nature of relationship or interaction with them?
Right. So when it comes to the stakeholders of Atal Tinkering Labs, we have, of course, the most obvious students and the teachers and the mentors. But another very crucial aspect of this are the schools themselves, the leadership of the schools, the management of the schools. And that is something that has been a strong focus because without the principal driving this program forward, the teachers won't have the motivation to do it, neither will the students. And building a community of schools together is also very important and it's part of our guidelines. Whenever a school receives a grant, it is very crucial that not just their school benefits, but 15 other community schools also benefit from that particular lab. So this entire community that they're nurturing or building is very critical. And we've tried to do that by creating a hub and spoke model where we've identified the most engaged teacher community and the most engaged mentor community. And we call them regional teachers of change and regional mentors of change. So these are people, and there are only about 100 or so of them across India. So they have been tasked with building and bringing the community together. They've been tasked with connecting that one particular ATL to other schools, to even other colleges that are in and around that area, and sort of develop that ecosystem within a region or a state. And a very critical part of doing that is, whatever they do is done in their regional language. And language focus is also has become important across the country, being it 75 years of independence. There's been a lot of focus on just identifying different communities and hubs across India, which are the most engaged, and connecting with them in their own regional language through the uniqueness they bring in. So yeah, essentially building a community, having the teachers, the mentors and students come in, not just from ATLs, but across the area and neighborhood is the focus. And those are our most critical stakeholders to really ensure success.
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually love to go deeper in community because I think that's a very, very important aspect for Atal Innovation Mission as well as education or edtech companies in general. But before I do that, I just wanted to quickly check if we have any questions. If otherwise, we can stop for questions a little later as well.
I think, Swati, it's, first of all, it's really insightful what you're saying. In terms of daily operational challenges, how do you balance the long term and the short term? If you can cover at some point during your remarks, will be really useful. Because I know there's a lot of firefighting that must be going on. And how do you keep the longer term thing in mind?
Yeah,
definitely. And we'll definitely touch upon that, when we talk about this particular bootcamp that we recently concluded, the ATL Tinkerpreneur, and we'll get to that, Varya.
Yeah,
sure.
But yeah, go ahead. You were saying something, Varya.
No, I think if there aren't any other questions, we can go ahead. So I think with community, what is interesting about Atal Innovation Mission is that it's not just one community, it's a community of communities in a way, right? If I were to very broadly put a structure, there are two big communities, that's of schools and that's of mentors. But then within this, there are different regional hubs that exist for schools and mentors respectively. And now with RTOCs, which are regional teachers of change, and RMOCs, who are regional mentors of change, we're creating intersections in which they align with each other. That's one big bucket of community. And then the other I would look at is what you briefly referred to, right? Tinkerpreneur, which was like a 9-week long cohort-based course or a boot camp in which how to set up a digital venture was taught to about 9,000 students. So that in itself becomes then a community where there were different students, mentors actively participating. So before going into detail for on Tinkerpreneur, because I think that's a very interesting case study in itself. I would love to hear your thoughts on just community building activities from a very practical sense, right? Like there are thousands of WhatsApp groups that you're a part of with all mentors and teachers and all of that. So how does the community building exercise on a monthly or a annual basis look for for these mentors and teachers and students also, of course.
Yeah. So community, though in our guidelines, we've tried to ask every ATL to support 15 other schools and whatnot. In reality, that's a lot more challenging for these schools to do. They need a lot more hand-holding on how do we do it? How do we know which student to allow, which teacher to allow? There are different sorts of NGOs that approach ATLs also. So there needs to be more clarity, firstly, even from our side, that we should handhold them a little more on how we can empower them to open their labs to others. But the way we've been trying to do that is partnering with a lot of public sector organizations who have a large presence in even the remotest parts of the country. So we've tied up with CBSE, with ISRO, with AICTE, with CSIR. So these are really, really big organizations with a lot of presence across the country. Apart from this, like you said, building a community is done with a very basic thing. We know that students don't have access, most of them don't have access to their own devices. Going down to the most rural parts of India, there must be one phone in the family which is used by the parents during the day. So it's usually the evening time when kids have access to phones. And a lot of the classes that are conducted, even mentoring is happening virtually. So WhatsApp has been one source where that is something that penetrates to the utmost ground level of India. And it is through WhatsApp that we've kept the teacher community very active, the student community very active, and the mentor community very active. But what really the challenges that happen with WhatsApp is, and you've seen that, when we are in a group and there are 5 of us from AIM and thousands of teachers and thousands of mentors, there are just innumerable number of questions that come, a lot of, challenges that they share with us, but it's virtually impossible for us to really solve all of them individually. So what we've done is we've built our own community, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that happens now within these groups. There are teachers that immediately answer a question that another school might be facing. And another thing that we need to focus on as an organization, we haven't done that so far, is when we spoke about the recognition bit, it's also very important to build this sort of community of tinkerers and innovators and keeping them motivated. So when we do the recognition, we sort of apply it uniformly to everybody. But in India, we see there are so many differences at so many levels. A school situated in Andaman will be very different from a school situated in Bangalore or Mumbai. So from our side, this is going to be our focus for the next few months, that we try to identify different groups where they can be judged more fairly. A newer ATL will be very different from an older ATL, a private school versus a government school, a rural area versus an urban area, and so on. And once we've done that, they'll also feel more happier that, we've featured in the top schools, although they're in the top schools of the newer and newly funded ATLs. So that is, I think, very crucial to also bringing this community together and to helping each other out whenever they face challenges which somebody else might have faced some time back. So that's what we're trying to do, bringing everyone together.
Yeah, and just adding to the peer-to-peer learning aspect, I think what in terms of community building, what Atal Innovation Mission has been able to do really well is also just make information available easily. So the reason a teacher is able to help another one is that there are a whole range of resources and information available. There are things like a knowledge hub, which are sessions done by the mentors for the mentors, as well as mentoring hour, which are sessions done by mentors for students that are done on a bi-monthly basis. So this ensures that there's some flow of activity and information happening every month. And like Swati mentioned, I think regional languages is the focus. The eventual goal is also to have these sessions done, say, in other local languages by different mentors and teachers taking up that opportunity. So making sure that as we also do projects, it's open for mentors and teachers to contribute in their own way if they think they can help with something specific. That platform is always available for them to pitch in. And I think with that, shifting gears to Tinkerpreneur would be very interesting, considering that's one program that's done in a very atypical way from any boot camp that's been organized, and also the kind of collaboration and contribution it has seen in a very short span of time. Like, if you look at from the time of its conceptualization to execution to it actually even ending, right? It's been less than, I think, 4-5 months, 6 at most, if we look at it from the start. And I think the impact and the excitement it had generated for a lot of students was quite exceptional. So with that, I would love for you to start with just explaining what Tinkerpreneur is, and even how the name came up. It's a very a lot of people have asked me, what does Tinkerpreneur even mean?
Yeah, so Tinkerpreneur is a very interesting concept, and Tinkerpreneur, for the name itself, it stands for tinkering and tinkering to become an entrepreneur. So that was the idea behind the name of Tinkerpreneur, and that was the boot camp that we did. So I got the idea of this boot camp while speaking to a mentor of change who had actually implemented a 10-week entrepreneurship boot camp for his students in his school for just about 20 to 30 children. It was very small scale, but a very detailed boot camp that he had conducted for his students. So since then, we've been, within the team with Varya and everyone, we was trying to figure out how can we take that small concept or a pilot to all the 8,000 ATLs across India. And we knew it's going to be a massive, massive challenge, and we had never undertaken any sort of challenge at that scale before. So we conceptualized a 9-week completely virtual bootcamp to introduce entrepreneurship to students. And though ATLs has been trying to bring in innovation and tinkering and creativity, entrepreneurship wasn't a very strong focus until this bootcamp happened. And through these 9 weeks, we envisioned to take children through creating a digital prototype, be it an app or a website, to finally, even learning to build a business model around it, to learning how to market it and finding investors and actually even pitching that product. So they went through an entire 9-week journey to learn all these skills. And that was something path-breaking for any a student in a government school or even a private school, for such young students to learn skills at that level. So that was our vision when we started out. And when we introduced it, there was a huge amount of interest and eagerness that we got from our students. So we decided to tweak it a little bit. Most of our competitions are for students and teachers. This was the first time we tried to do this bootcamp for just our mentors and our students. So we planned on connecting 14 to 15 students to one mentor of change. So that was the idea, what we wanted to do for a one-to-one sort of mentoring in this 9-week bootcamp. So we solicited interest, and we got interest from around 9,000 plus students across India. We got interest from 650 mentors across India. And this scale was massive, even for us, being a government body. So the whole, we knew that when this happened, the challenges are going to be incredible. But if we can pull it off, the impact also would be incredible. So there we started, whole back-end operations of it, where Varya was given the most complicated task of this all was mapping these students basis their region, basis their language, to a suitable mentor who had signed up. So that was a mammoth task in itself. And then I started planning with the government sort of tech team that we have to create a portal which is all-inclusive. So that portal itself would be an asset for us going forward. And we planned the portal in such a way that it would have all the curated content for each of the weeks, such that it is completely self-learning. However, if mentoring support is needed, which of course it would be, we had a one-to-one mentor mapping also done. So in this portal, kids could learn, they could watch videos, they could even submit quizzes and assignments, which the mentor would grade and give feedback all completely through the portal itself. So that was something that was very interesting for us and something we can really use for all our future challenges as well, having everything inbuilt within this. And what we realized, there were a lot of tech issues definitely that came up. And in the first 2 days of the launch, I think Varya and my phones were completely bombarded with messages on how do we make this work, how do we interact, how do we solve this challenge. And never in our life did we imagine that 2 complete days we would spend on just answering people. But that eventually paid off, and we realized that if we can just get through the first week and all the glitches, it would be a smooth journey going forward. And that's what happened. I mean, at the end of the 9th week, we had over 600 final ready business ventures that came out of it. And that was an amazing journey for us. For us to evaluate those, for us to identify which are the most promising out of this lot was such an enjoyable journey. You know, we saw kids. I can give an example of one particular girl. She's just 12 years old, and she came up with an idea of a Carnatic music buddy. And the thought behind that was she herself is a classically trained singer. And she realized that a lot of students don't have the means to hire a Guruji or even get access to a Guruji in the pandemic that we are living in now. So she created this through completely artificial intelligence. There were algorithms built in which would teach you whether you're singing in the right sur or not. So, you know, that was an interesting, simple idea, but something that was actually completely developed by a student. Yeah, I mean, some of the challenges, Varya, you know the challenges that we've been facing. And one of them is just a dropout of both students and mentors. And finally, how do you bridge that gap of a mentor dropping out in the last minute or a student dropping out? So that's when we came up with one-to-many mentoring sessions, where we organized YouTube live sessions for a larger audience. And we did that not just in English, but in 7 regional languages. So that really solved one of the major challenges, which was the dropout rate between both students and mentors.
Yeah, just on what Swati said. Yeah, I think an interesting way of looking at it would be that there's one which is the personalized aspect, which is each student is mapped to a mentor, and one mentor won't have more than 13 or 14 students. The second is that students have complete access to a portal which has curated content for them, and this content is pretty self-explanatory, very simple to follow, and has like a small assignment at the end of every week so that the student can sort of process everything that they've learned. And I think the final aspect, what makes it interesting, are the live videos. And these videos, some of them were just mentoring sessions in general, which at a very basic level explained everything that's happened in that week to a student. So hypothetically, if the week is on building a digital product, the mentor will just recapitulate whatever's there in the portal in textual form in a more engaging way. But we also had very interesting mentors and people join in who would actually teach. So a lot of Network Capital members also did sessions on different things from product building to marketing and so on to talk about it. But I think what is interesting, Swati, you mentioned about how Atal Innovation Mission, it's housed in a government body but operates like a startup. And I think the Tinkerpreneur Bootcamp is a very good example of that, because most of the things, if not all, were figured out as things progressed. And I think it'll be interesting to do a deeper dive in the specific weeks, right? So, for example, just starting with week 1, when the challenge was making sure that mapping really sticks through and works out, versus towards the end when you're really thinking about how are you evaluating students, considering there are students from all sorts of backgrounds who have participated and they've consistently consistently submitted assignments, created a project for every week. So I think it'll be interesting to sort of look at both these angles and aspects.
Yeah, I mean, during the bootcamp itself, the first 2 weeks were all about creating that digital prototype and refining it. And that is something that kids are very familiar with and have been doing for a while as a part of Atal Tinkering Labs. even in that, we had organized for them to learn around 30 digital skills all through the portal itself. One challenge that we faced during the 9 weeks was, out of the 9,000 kids that had signed up, most of them were still very, very interested in just the first 2 weeks where they get to build a digital product. So that mindset within them that, building is great, but after that, taking it to the next stage and learning those essential skills is also very, very important. That sort of mindset change did happen, but needs to really take place on a larger scale now. So we did see a lot of dropout among students right after they built a digital product, and they thought that's it. They're not interested in how to build a business model, how to market it, how to build a brand around it, and so on. But those that did stick around, they were the ones who really gained a lot of knowledge from, like Varya mentioned, we had startup founders, we had people from the network capital world who came in and shared their stories with the students. And apart from just learning these skills, that sort of inspiration where they see these people who are very young, just probably 10, 15 years elder to them, who are now heading a startup, who are employing so many people in India. So that is something that was very unique, which came through this bootcamp. In fact, our finale session featured Mr. Narayan Murthy, who did not speak about any digital skill or even any entrepreneurial skill. He spoke about ethics. And we've had tremendous feedback from mentors and from teachers that this is what is needed. And our entire curriculum, or whatever we teach in ATLs, is all about science and innovation and technology. But the softer skills, that also needs a huge focus, especially for younger kids. It's a skill that you build from the ground up. So that is also was a very big learning for us as well as for the students, that the softer skills aspect got covered through this. Pitching, they learned how to confidently pitch their idea in a short span of time and really putting the key pointers about their idea through that. So those were some of the very interesting takeaways from the bootcamp for us.
Sorry. Yeah, and just adding to that, I think one more thing which personally for me I found to be the most powerful during the course of the bootcamp is actually helping students see that they can do things, build things, and more on the aspirational side of learning and education. For example, I think 1 month into the bootcamp, we hosted 2 students who had been the most top performing students in the bootcamp up until then, to talk about their experience and learning. And what really stood out from that interaction and that conversation was that, yes, you learn technical skills, but the challenge of technical skills is that they might become outdated very quickly. So I think it's not the end goal stopped being about, say, learning artificial intelligence or how to make a chatbot or any of that, but helping students look at learning in a way that they can learn whatever they set their mind to. And these are the tangible outcome of them learning X, Y, and Z. And outcome could be, them becoming an entrepreneur, them becoming someone who builds great products and is focused on the technical side of things, or even exploring communication and brand building and all of that. I think a large part of bootcamp, especially in the second half, focused just on how do you communicate your idea well, right? Because you could have the best idea in the world and not be able to talk about it. So I think just a combination of all of that made the bootcamp very interesting.
Also wanted to add, like Utkarsh mentioned, there were a few learnings for us as well from this. And so during the bootcamp, we realized that, it was an entrepreneurship bootcamp. But like I said, there were a lot of glitches, a lot of issues in the first week of it. So going forward, whenever the next edition comes out, Varya and I were discussing that we should open it up as a sort of boot camp before it finally starts, to enable people to start thinking, what do you want to make once it begins? What are your ideas? What are the problems that you want to solve? So start thinking of that much before the actual start of the boot camp. Also, just mapping and the technical issues, all those have to be pre-planned much in advance, and we've realized that through this. And Varya can share more on the mapping bit itself, mentor to student mapping, and what were the learnings from that, and how can we sort of incorporate it in the next edition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mapping, I think just matchmaking in general, it's a massive industry. If you just remove mentorship like across, and doing it for education in particular just becomes so much more complex and challenging. What you can do is try to optimize for specific things. And I think the one thing that we did well that helped us in mapping was know very clearly what things are important for us. So for example, language was more important than region. So, two people can hypothetically be neighbors, but we won't map them if they don't speak the same language. So we prioritized that. After language, we looked at region, and we also made sure that, mentors had finite amount of students only, considering it'll get very challenging for them. Most of them are working professionals. So one part was that. And I think the other thing was also just communicating it well, right? A lot of times, one thing that I noticed in the first week was when you share a lot of information with people in one go, it can overwhelm them. So just phasing that out, telling them slowly that, okay, great, now you've been mapped to people, this is step one. Then after some time, give them step 2, 3, and 4 instead of telling them all at once. And then, just creating a lot of confusion. So I think that's important. And yes, I think because we were able to get mapping largely right, I think the only cases where mapping didn't work was where, due to health or other reasons, mentors had to back out, because this was happening in the peak of the second wave of COVID, right? So a lot of people had to back out due to health issues. Was just to be mentally prepared that, okay, these are the people we might have to potentially remap or change, and just sort of taking the more entrepreneurial approach of thinking on the go and figuring out whatever the best solution might be. So I think that's what really helped with mapping and making sure that both mentors and students have a good experience. And I think that's what helped, because both mentors and students largely had a positive experience, even if there were glitches or things that didn't work out in the most ideal way, they were supportive. And I think with that, we are almost at the end of the session. I see one question already in the chat. So if there are any others, we can go through them. I'll start with Keshav's question, which is, on attracting quality mentors virtually to participate in Mentor India, considering it's a not-for-profit initiative, what are the ways in which you can incentivize them that are not monetary?
So most of our initiatives are completely non-monetary. We, being a grant-giving body, we don't have the means to give out any cash prizes, give out any sort of monetary benefits to any of our stakeholders. And Mentor India being completely voluntary, it's even more challenging on what do we really do for them. So we do different things, and maybe these are useful to others who are running similar programs. And what we've realized works is just firstly hearing them out one-on-one, hearing them out, giving them that special attention to those who are doing really well, and giving them the platform to share their story with somebody that they look up to. For us, it starts with our mission director, Dr. Chintan Vaishnav. It then goes on to the CEO of NITI Aayog, to the vice chairman of NITI Aayog, giving the top performing mentors an opportunity to just interact with them. I mean, that is something that we've seen really works and drives them for the next 1 year, that they're completely motivated and charged up. Apart from that, we recognize the monthly efforts that they put in. We have a system in which we track their activity and engagement with schools. And every month on all the official social media handles that NITI Aayog and AIM have, we post their pictures, their names, and it's all highlighted publicly. So that is also something which they can share on their own professional platforms on LinkedIn. We give out badges and certificates to these top performing mentors. And once a year, we also invite all these mentors to the Delhi NITI Aayog office. Now that it's virtual, it's different. But earlier we used to do that, where we call them all here. We give them an entire day of just celebrating them, sharing their stories with different dignitaries. We had the NASSCOM president who was invited. Ms. Devjani Ghosh, who, just heard them out. And like I said, that goes a long way. And we also launched a book, a special edition book from NITI Aayog side. It's called The Gems of Mentor India, where we highlight their best practices that they are following, their stories, their photographs, and so on. So again, so there are a couple of different things that we do to keep them engaged. But at the most basic level, every day of the week, we conduct these calls where Varya and I and the Mentor India team, we speak to them and we just say, tell us what's wrong, what works, what doesn't work. And then they look forward to the next time we speak and whatever progress was made in our previous conversation. So it's an ongoing process, starting at the very basic level to a higher sort of engagement.
Yeah, just I want to make a point on building off what Swati said. So, fellows, if you read today's newsletter on access economy and the NFT, so this was the broad point that we were making. That in today's world, of course, what does an NFT indicate? It's basically deeper access. What is Swati explaining about? It's deeper access. So people do what they do often for exclusivity, access, and experience. And in the newsletter, you will see the Jobs to be Done framework by Clayton Christensen, a former management professor. So what Swati is describing, you should look at what's the job to be done for Swati and her team at NITI. And what is the experience that you want the mentor to feel. So it'll be interesting to take away. It's a classic example of an access economy implemented by a government organization. So it's super interesting. But Varya, you can just continue.
Hey, hi, Praneeth here. So I had a basic question on how this program was structured. I know it is run by NITI Aayog, but did they consciously want to put it outside the formal school board? Why was this not done through CBSE or another school board like that? Did they want to do it as a standalone program? Because the reason I'm asking is because now CBSE has gone and tied up with Microsoft, and they have launched their own set of coding curriculum, data science curriculum, and all that, right? So why is this being run outside the formal government regulation, school boards and all that?
So thanks, Praneeth, for that. And I'd just like to give you sort of a broad background of when AIM started and how it started. So it was a part of Ministry of Planning, and the idea behind it was to implement this in a few schools, and like I said, create a structure, a skeleton, which can then be taken on by different state governments and adopted in their own way. And we wanted it to be taught differently from the general curriculum that is there in schools, because we are trying to bring in a mindset change, and to do that, it has to be free of any sort of worry of exams, of tests, of any sort of monitoring over a child. And we just wanted them to explore different technologies in a very comfortable, free learning space where they are free to fail, they're free to break, they're free to learn. So that was the thought behind when AIM was started. But like you rightly mentioned, a lot of government organizations are working in silos. Even within NITI, there's a lot of things happening, which there is a need to, bring it all together. And I'm sure that we can solve most of our problems if you bring different stakeholders together and we just share what we're doing and fits into a puzzle. That is the eventual goal. However, we are also working with CBSE, and it is slightly different from what they're doing with, by bringing in these curriculums within this general school sort of agenda. But this is separate, and they are willing to partner with us as well in taking this to further remote areas, into developing maybe a lighter model of Atal Tinkering Labs to suit different kinds of schools and different kinds of backgrounds and geographies. So it came with a different sort of mindset altogether when it started.
Yeah, also I think just a lot of entrepreneurship and tech adoption in schools has happened off late, but at least Atal Tinkering Labs has now been running for over 5 years. I think 2016 it started. So I think a lot of the developments that are happening now are much newer.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the future of the program. How are you all thinking about it? And what can everybody, Swati, just so you know, we run a lot of these cohort-based fellowships, obviously, you
Yeah.
know. And our students, some of them are interested in policy, some of them want to build programs, and some are prospective entrepreneurs. Some of them are, investors and even very senior professors at some of the global universities. So it's a very wide spectrum of people. They would love to hear some thoughts on that. How are you thinking about it, not just what?
Going forward, I think it's been 4 years now, and the focus area for us is also understanding the impact of this program now. How do we measure the impact? How do we assess or justify the creation of more schools? And that is a bit tricky because measuring impact of innovation or entrepreneurship is a very long-term process. So we're trying to figure that out, and whether we can have short-term goals, long-term goals to really understand the impact. And once we have that study in place, I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation to have as well in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Swati, thank you so much for today's session. I think it's been really interesting, and just, seeing all that Atal Innovation Mission has been able to do in the last 4 years, and more so what is coming up in the next couple of years is really exciting. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone else for joining in.
Thank you,
Swati.
Maria, thank you, Utkarsh, and thank you everybody who's joined in. I had a wonderful time. Yes, thank you.